Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Conservative Corner. I'm Elliot Margolis, and my guest today is Father Brian Chase from the Anglican Church in Danvers on Route 62 at the Beverly-Danvers line. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Let's get right into it.
Sure.
What is the Anglican Church?
Yes, the Anglican Church. I get that question all the time because people will look at the name and often they'll call us Anglican instead of Anglican. That's the mispronouncement that I get quite a bit. And people will ask questions like, does it have something, do you worship angels or something like that? And nothing along those lines. Anglican actually means English. And so the Anglican Church is essentially the English Church, the Church of England, which, it sort of gets a bad rap with the connections with Henry VIII and all of that. But if you look at the Church of England as it understands itself and Anglicanism, we see our beginnings not with Henry VIII, but actually going all the way back to St. Augustine of Canterbury, who evangelized England all the way back in 597 AD. So we see ourselves as a tradition that actually reaches back more than 1,500 years and is rather ancient.
Okay. But what exactly is Anglicanism? I mean, there's so many different sects in every religion.
Yep.
I mean, I'm Jewish, so we have the Orthodox, the Conservative, the Reform.
Yep.
Yep.
So one of the most common ways of describing Anglicanism is as in Latin it would be the via media, which is Latin for the middle way. And that kind of helps to describe sort of the uniqueness of Anglicanism as sort of charting a middle way between Roman Catholic and Protestant. And so when you look at us, you'll see sort of similarities to both. So, obviously we predate the Reformation by 1,000 years as a church. When the Church of England broke away from Rome, it didn't start a new church, didn't start a new religion. Kept the same churches, bishops, liturgy, but at the same time, it does have differences from both. So, for instance, we're different from the Roman Church in that we don't have a pope. We have married priests. We've left behind certain things like indulgences and things like that. But we're also different from a lot of Protestants in that we have bishops and priests and apostolic succession, liturgy, tradition, 7 sacraments and vestments, and so on and so forth. So Anglicanism sort of charts this middle path, but between the two.
So you have married priests.
We do have married priests. Yeah, there's the ring.
Well,
I've got the proof.
It's interesting because I have a lot of Catholic friends, and we talk about that sometimes and say, why is it that priests can't get married?
Yeah.
That seems, to me, unnatural.
Yeah, well, if you look back at history, actually it's the celibate priesthood is a fairly recent thing. It sort of developed between the right around 1100, 1200, and so by the time you got to the Reformation, it had only been 200 or 300 years old. But if you go back into the first 1,000 years of the church, there were a lot of married priests and even married bishops, as a matter of fact. So Anglicanism, one of the reasons that we have this sort of via media is Anglicanism sort of saw itself as looking at the Roman Church and saying, you know what, they've actually added on to the ancient faith, things like celibate priesthood and indulgences and things like that. So Anglicanism sort of saw itself as, cutting back on those innovations and returning to sort of that patristic early era. For us, that was especially the first 500 years of church history sort of marked the bounds of that sort of original era that we sought to return to, which in that era you had married priests and even married bishops.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It is.
I didn't know that. See, I knew I was going to learn something
Yeah.
today.
And that's why, that's why we have both similarities with the Roman Catholic Church, liturgy, bishops, and all that. But we also have differences because we sort of put that cutoff at a different place.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now this week, of course, Easter is coming up.
It is.
Palm Sunday is coming up.
Big week.
Yeah. Passover is coming up, and
That's
it seems
right.
like Passover and Easter always come together.
They do, actually.
And maybe you can explain this to me because I don't necessarily understand it.
Yeah.
I understand why Passover changes dates every year because we go by the Hebrew calendar.
Which is a lunar calendar.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that what you go by? Is the lunar calendar?
Yeah. It's pretty interesting. The church sort of has two calendars that overlap. A solar calendar, which is sort of based on the date of Christmas and all the dates of the saints. But it also has a lunar calendar, which is based off of Passover. And so that's why Easter and Palm Sunday and Pentecost, of course, Jews and Christians share Pentecost as well, sort of jumps around every year. We sort of calculate it a little differently than Jews. There's a slightly different calendar there. How it's calculated based on full moons and so on and so forth. There's some complex formula for it. So yeah, if you go to other countries, here we call Easter. But if you go look at a lot of other languages, actually Easter is usually called something like Pascha, which means Passover. Mm-hmm. It's the Christian Passover. And that's because Jesus was crucified on the Passover. And so those dates always sort of line up.
Yeah, they say that the Last Supper was really a Passover Seder.
It was a Passover Seder. It was, and you can see that if you read the Gospels, it sort of follows that same outline. It's got even in Luke it has several different glasses of wine that are blessed. And it's got the wine and the bread and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, essentially Jesus was taking the Passover liturgy and altering it a little bit and saying, now I am the Passover lamb. And instead of a lamb, this is my body, he says. And so it's sort of there's a lot of continuity between the two, which is intentional. It's fascinating.
Well, we'll talk about a little continuity later, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Holy Week.
Yeah.
Because it's coming up.
It is.
It's very important.
Yeah.
And I personally know very little about it. So educate me.
So Holy Week essentially follows the last week of Christ's life, earthly life, I guess you could say. And it begins with Palm Sunday, which for us this year will be on April 13th, coming up very, very soon. And it goes through that whole entire week and sort of crescendos on the last 3 days, which is Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, and then Holy Saturday. And then finally we come to the Feast of the Resurrection, which is on Easter. So to sort of trace that out, we begin on we begin on Palm Sunday, when Jesus entered into Jerusalem riding on a donkey, and crowds greeted him with songs of Hosanna and Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And all those crowds believed that Christ was the Messiah. And so they greeted him as such, with waving palms in the air and a big celebration. And we do the same exact thing in our liturgies today. We begin with a big procession of palms, but then that liturgy kind of turns a little dark, and we have what's called the narrative passion, where we read the Gospels, but we don't just read it out like you would read a book. everyone in the congregation sort of has their own part. And this is actually a very, very ancient liturgy. And it comes to the point where the crowd is the one yelling, "Crucify." Not just the crowd on the story, but the crowd there at the church. And so it's sort of like a reliving of the events. And then from there, we go into all the different events of Holy Week. Maundy Thursday, it's not Monday Thursday, Maundy Thursday, which comes from the Latin mendatum, which is the Latin word for command. And this refers to John chapter 13, where Jesus washed his disciples' feet. And he told them that if anyone will be a leader among you, he is first to be a servant and to wash one another's feet. And so at our Maundy Thursday service, we have the ceremonial washing of feet. And then it sort of follows Christ's final hours there, where he's betrayed, and then to his prayers in the garden. And then finally that liturgy ends very solemnly with what we call the stripping of the altar, where we take all of the decorations, basically, in the sanctuary, and we take them down and take them apart, and then sort of clean and whip the altar, sort of representing Christ when he's taken before the Sanhedrin and stripped and whipped. And then that brings us to Good Friday, the next day, which is another beautiful liturgy. The high point of that liturgy is what's called the veneration of the cross, where we bring out a cross and sing an ancient song called the Reproaches, which is essentially Jesus on the cross saying, "What did I do? what did I do to deserve this?" And of course, the song answers the question. And if you want to know the answer, you'll have to come to the service. But it's a beautiful little liturgy, and ends with sort of the laying of Christ in the tomb. And then finally comes the exciting part at the ancient Easter Vigil on Holy Saturday evening. And it's sort of the liturgy begins in darkness, and in the midst of this darkness, a fire is kindled, representing the life coming back into Christ in the tomb. So it's almost like you get to be there in that moment when the life comes back into Christ. You get to be there and present. And then the rest of that liturgy is really, really fascinating. And you may find some of it familiar, because what it does is it traces the Exodus sort of symbolically. And so, and looks at the Exodus metaphorically. So just as the Israelites were freed from slavery in Egypt and then taken through the Red Sea to the Promised Land, so metaphorically we sort of see that as us being freed from slavery to the world of flesh and the devil through the waters of baptism, symbolized by the Red Sea, and then into the kingdom of God. And so in that liturgy, we have all these different symbols of the Exodus. There's a Paschal candle, which is a big, tall candle, almost as taller than I am. And we light it representing the pillar of fire that led Israel out of Exodus. We have incense, and so the pillar of smoke. And then we have a procession from the back of the church to the baptismal font. We have all of these readings of the Exodus as well. And then we have baptisms on that night, or at least the blessing of the baptismal waters, representing going through the Red Sea. And then on the other side of that, we begin the first Mass of Easter with shouts of Alleluia, which is important because we stopped saying Alleluia on Ash Wednesday. So all the way through Lent, 40 days of Lent, no one says Alleluia. And then finally, with our first celebration of the resurrection, we bring back that wonderful word of praise. And so it's really very meaningful. If you allow, I find that the more you put into your Lent, and if you really are disciplined and come to all of those services, they're a really very beautiful and meaningful moment, and it can really be life-changing.
Yeah, because being Jewish, we have a lot of the similar type stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And stories are very similar.
Yep.
You know, and it's interesting. They all have meaning.
They do.
And it's, you know, the more I go, the more I learn.
Yeah.
And the more it makes sense.
Yeah.
if that makes sense to you.
That's precisely it. I find that religion is an interesting thing because you don't know how much you get out of it until you've done it for a while. It's after you've had the discipline to go and sit in it and bask in it, that on the other end of that you say, oh wow, this really is making a difference. It's sort of like taking your vitamins. You know, you think, it's not going to do anything. And then you do it and you realize, oh wow, this really has had an effect.
Do you find that people are starting to come back to church? I mean, I know there was a time not that long ago when people seemed to be leaving the church and forgetting about believing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's been an interesting trend in America since especially the 1960s, where every decade church attendance has gone down significantly. But we're kind of starting to wonder if that hasn't bottomed out, because over the past 2 or 3 years, there seems to be a lot of renewed interest in the church and in religion. And you know, we ourselves, I think we've seen a lot of new young families and college students come into the church over the past couple of months. And we have a lot of young families at the church, as a matter of fact, which I think is very encouraging. But you know, I think that we, especially here in New England, it's no longer the case that the religious folks are the ones in the majority, in a sense. You know, and there are a lot of kids that have grown up without religion. And so now religion is sort of the novel thing. It's the new thing. It's the different thing. And so there's a lot of, I think, very healthy interest. And yeah, I've seen that interest in the church.
What I see is when I occasionally go to Torah class.
Yeah.
Okay, and you listen to what that teaches.
Yeah.
Everything is so relevant today.
It is.
And it's amazing to me how the connection is, but people learn.
Yep.
And you find out that it's there and it's always been there.
Yep.
So,
it always has been.
Yeah.
That's one of the most interesting things I think about studying the Bible. Is essentially you have all of these old books that are thousands of years old, that have been translated from ancient dead languages, but yet people study it and they find meaning in it, meaning that applies to their lives today, meaning that changes their lives, and I feel like a lot of people are looking for that, and it's one of the greatest joys of my job is seeing people find that meaning, having that realization, and it's something we're all looking for.
Well, I know a year and a half ago, my wife passed away.
I'm sorry to hear
and
that.
last spring, I think it was, a friend of mine who you know said that our church is having a service honoring people who have passed away in the past year. And he added my wife's name to that. And for me, to have that happen at the Anglican church as opposed to a temple, that was really special.
Yeah, that is special.
And it just shows that we're all in this thing together.
We are.
And it doesn't matter what religion you are, because I've gone to a number of interfaith services. Okay, and I read the prayers, and I'm familiar with the prayers in Judaism, but I'm not familiar with the prayers in Catholicism or anything.
Yeah.
You know what? We say the same things in a different way,
Yep.
but we all believe in the same God. It's just a different way of saying it. And I mean, from my perspective, it's time people realize people are people,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter whether you're Jewish, Catholic, Protestant. What matters is you believe.
Well, there's been a lot of really interesting research lately on the impact of religion on, for instance, mental health, and a healthy approach to religion, which is usually one that's not too extreme, will have a lot of very positive benefits for a lot of people, in the way that you think about things. It has often a good, big impact on depression. It provides you with a social network. It provides you with a basic narrative for understanding your life and where you fit within it. And also, very importantly, relationships. And other people who are looking for meaning in life the same sort of way that you are. And so, I think it can be a very healthy thing. If someone's out there and they're thinking to themselves, man, I don't have any friends, or I just can't seem to make sense of life, try out a church, or a synagogue, and you may find that that meaning's out there, and it just might be looking for you.
Well, that's true. I mean, there's different organizations in the church, different groups that get together to do things.
Yeah.
And you get friends.
You do.
And all of a sudden, when you have friends, you have more meaning.
You do.
And I have found that.
Yeah.
So it's not only the prayers.
That's right.
It's a part of life.
Yep.
And I think people were missing that.
That's true. None of us were meant to go through this life thing alone by ourselves. We were intended to go through it with other people. And, I think that this has become especially pronounced since the pandemic. American culture was already very individualistic before the pandemic. But, after the pandemic, we all sort of locked ourselves in our own homes, and we started interacting with each other through Zoom. And then we got our cell phones and all this technology, and we just scroll. None of that is very healthy for us. And as much as our secular culture has tried to find other outlets for that sort of socialization and developing deep relationships, I don't feel like they've been very successful at it, especially over the past couple of years. And I do think that that's something that religion can offer, and that is so vital for just a healthy life.
No, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been really great for me because, when my wife was sick, I had to spend time at home with her.
Yeah.
And which was fine. I needed to do that. I wanted to do that. But when she passed, I needed something.
Yep.
And I went to the Chabad in Peabody, the Chabad in Beverly, and I found what I needed.
Yep.
Exactly. And, but most of my friends are not Jewish.
Yeah.
A number of them go to your church.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. What matters is the people. It's who you are, not what you are.
Yeah.
That's important.
It's interesting you say that, because I've known so many people who think they don't need it, or they're at a certain stage in life where it's not important. But then next thing you know, push comes to shove. There's some sort of a life emergency, and they don't have that network that you can oftentimes only get from something like a church. And suddenly it's not there for them. So I always tell people that developing these sorts of communities is sort of like investing. You want to start when you're young, so that when you get old and push comes to shove, it's there for you. And so, yeah, you know, a lot of people out there may think that they don't need it right now, but I'll tell you what, you will. And you'll be very happy when it's there, and you've invested in it already.
But the reality is, you do need it now, whether you think you do or not.
That's a really good point too.
Okay,
you're right.
because you can never have too many friends.
Yep.
Helping people, and even helping yourself, makes a difference. And the church or the temple, it doesn't matter. The mosque, it doesn't matter. It just, you need that socialization and the education.
It's true. Yeah.
So I think it's been good for me.
Yeah.
Okay, and a lot of my friends, it's been very good for them, no matter what religion they are. And that's what we really have to learn, is that you need to believe.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter whether it's Jewish, Catholic, Anglicanism, whatever.
Yeah.
You need to believe. You need to be part of something.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's all sorts of good that we can do together. You know, all of our beliefs might not be identical. There may be little bits where we disagree here and there, but we can all still come together on those things that we do agree on, and I think have a lot of positive impact on our world. You know, we all believe in caring for the poor. We all agree on being there for those who need it, and creating these social networks, and praising God and His goodness, and so on and so forth. And there's so much that, even despite our differences, that we can do together.
We don't have too much time left, but there's one thing that has always bothered me. When you look at history, there's been an awful lot of wars because of religion.
Yeah.
That seems to be inconsistent with what religion really means. And
it is inconsistent. As a matter of fact, I saw a study that was done recently on divvying up, sort of studying as many of the wars of history as could be studied, and you know, fighting out their causes. And what this study found was that actually, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was less than 10% of wars throughout history were actually religious wars.
Oh, really? Okay.
So,
well, that's good to know.
There are some things, you know, there were some, there are some things you look back on and that were terrible. There have been religious wars. There have been the Crusades, and, you know, and a lot of the wars, the Reformation, all those were terrible and wrong. But I think sometimes it gets a little blown out of proportion. And I hope that through history we've done more good than we have bad.
Yeah. That's a good way to end the show right there. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this as interesting as I did, and we'll see you next time.